Now, today we will be looking at how to write a comparative critical review, in which you have to compare two different works of literature. Now, for instance, we will take Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby and compare that with All My Sons by Arthur Miller. Now, when you look at these two works of literature, and when you want to compare them, of course one being a novel and one being a play, the first thing that you have to keep in mind is that in the first part of your review, you need to look at the commonalities that exist between the two. For instance, in comparing The Great Gatsby by Scott Fitzgerald and Arthur Miller's All My Sons, the theme seems to be very close, which is the failure of the American dream. Also, you need to discuss the setting of both stories, in which both are, in a way, post-war era. Of course, Great Gatsby being World War I and the years that followed, whereas All My Sons by Arthur Miller, the focus of the setting is mostly on World War II and what followed after that. So you need to discuss basically how in the First World War and having the Americans win the war, what followed was this vast absorbing of power and money that came into United States, and as a result of that, we have this luxury that was created, this huge amount of money that of course led to corruption, and that corruption being the crime that Great Gatsby himself was involved with, and also discussing how that led to his surroundings being quite detached from him, that when he needed help, when he was actually striving to reach that American dream, he did not succeed well. Of course, after that we need to discuss and find the commonalities of that social dilemma that we're dealing with, compare that with what happened in All My Sons, in which after World War II, Larry's son, basically Joe Keller's son, Larry, committed suicide, and of course Chris, being the other son, was unaware of the fact, but he could have guessed that his father was involved. And when he asks his father near the end of why you did this, he says, I did this all because of you, all because of the family. And that's the irony, that what Joe Keller did to save one family not only destroyed 21 families on the other side of the Pacific, but also led to the demise of his own son, which makes it very, very significant. Now, after we have discussed these commonalities, we need to go into the second part of the comparative review, in which you need to discuss both works of literature in terms of their theme, not only that, but also their characters, their plot, which is the opening, the build-up, the complication, inner complication, outer complication, climax, and of course ending. And you need to explain both individually. So for instance, when you are discussing The Great Gatsby, you need to discuss how the leading character was actually Nick, and he was being judgmental in the sense that he was portraying the characters in his own way, and that's alright, but you have to mention him and his judgmental perspective towards the situation. And not only that, discuss the three key characters that were in The Great Gatsby, being Daisy and Tom, and of course The Great Gatsby himself. All of these three, Tom, Gatsby, and Daisy, have a direct relationship with the leading character, which is Nick. Now you need to remember that Myrtle is not a key character. She's actually the climax of the story. She is the one that creates the climax of the story, and of course the golden car is the element, the climactic element that changes the course of the story upside down, and that is our climax, which led to the ending, the surprising ending of the story. After discussing the story in details, you need to discuss All My Sons in details, and in that story your leading character is Chris, and the three key characters are Joe Keller, his father, his mother, and of course Anne. And what you have to understand about these three key characters is that all of them have a direct relationship with Chris, number one, and their relationship is of significance, number two. And also the complication of the story being this mystery of who was responsible for Larry's death, and more interesting than that, what was the fate of Larry and what really happened to him, in which by the end we realize the ending. We understand that he committed suicide. Now what is very important is that you understand that here George is the Myrtle of this story. George is the climax. He brings the climactic element, which is Joe Keller's sickness. And when you discuss both stories, then you can put these similar points in which Myrtle and George were both the climax that entered the story and shifted the story upside down. Now remember, in the last part, you need to discuss the differences between the stories. And the number one difference is that in All My Sons, it's not so much about the failure of the American dream, but actually the tragedy of the American society, and how after World War II, a country that has won 2 world wars is now faced with a population that has given up on themselves and have given up on their ideals. And this is the main idea that you need to discuss. That the idealism